Your brain is not broken, it is caught. Caught inside a loop, it cannot identify, cannot interrupt, and cannot escape without understanding what is actually running it. Notice that feeling, the one where you sit down to think, and nothing moves forward. You replay the same thought. You return to the same problem. You circle back without resolution, and the circuit keeps firing. That is not a productivity failure. That is a neural pattern. And it has a name. Cognitive science refers to this as ruminative cycling. But inside the neurofitness framework, it operates under a specific mechanism called the closed signal loop. The closed signal loop is not a metaphor. It is a functional description of what happens when the brain's default processing network fails to discharge unresolved cognitive tension. Notice the drift. The loop is not random. Every unresolved decision, every incomplete task, every suppressed cognitive conflict generates what researchers broadly call an open file. A signal waiting for closure. The brain does not discard open files. It keeps them active. It pings them. Repeatedly, that ping is what you experience as mental noise. The low hum of something unfinished pressing against your focus. Most people interpret that noise as stress, or anxiety, or distraction. But the source is structural, not emotional. The brain is doing exactly what it is designed to do. It is flagging unresolved inputs for processing. The problem is, the processing never completes. Each time the loop fires and finds no resolution, it reactivates, stronger, louder, more resource. This is the break. The loop is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of an overloaded resolution system. Cognitive science suggests that the prefrontal cortex, which is broadly responsible for decision-making and executive function, requires clear resolution signals to close active loops. Without them, the default mode network continues cycling. That cycling consumes energy. Real, measurable, neural energy. Energy that would otherwise support focus, working memory, and clear sequential thinking. This is why your brain feels slow, not because it is underperforming, because it is running too many background processes simultaneously. You are not failing to focus. You are focusing on too many unresolved signals at once. The distinction matters, because the intervention looks completely different depending on which problem you are actually solving. Notice the pattern. Most productivity systems treat the symptom. They suggest removing distractions, blocking time, scheduling focus sessions. These are surface interventions applied to a structural problem. The closed signal loop does not care about your calendar. It operates beneath conscious awareness. It runs whether or not you have scheduled a deep work block. What it requires is resolution input, not time management, not willpower. Resolution. Here is where the mechanism becomes observable in daily behavior. Think about the last time you opened a task and immediately felt resistance. That resistance was not laziness. It was the brain calculating the cognitive cost of entering an unresolved loop and making a quiet decision to defer. Deferral feels like procrastination. It presents as distraction. But the underlying driver is the brain protecting its available processing bandwidth. It is widely observed that humans avoid tasks not because of difficulty, but because of unresolved ambiguity attached to those tasks. The brain cannot begin cleanly what it cannot define clearly. Notice the drift again. Every deferred task becomes another open file. Every open file adds weight to the loop. The system compounds, not suddenly, gradually, one unresolved input at a time. This is why the mental slowness you experience often builds over weeks, not days. It is an accumulation effect, not a single cognitive event. The loop grows in the background, quietly consuming resources, quietly degrading the clarity signal. By the time you notice the fog, the loop has been running for some time. You experience the endpoint, not the process. This is also why rest alone does not always resolve it. You can sleep 8 hours and wake up inside the same loop, because rest recharges the system, but it does not close the files. The loop resumes exactly where it paused. This is the structural insight most approaches miss entirely. Recovery is not the same as resolution. The closed signal loop requires specific interruption, not passive recovery, and the interruption must be applied at the source of the open file, not at the level of energy or rest. Notice this. What keeps the loop closed is not effort, it is clarity. The brain needs to know that a signal has been received, categorized, and either resolved or intentionally deferred with a defined future action. That final step is what most cognitive systems skip. Intentional deferral is not the same as passive avoidance. When the brain registers a deliberate decision, even a decision to return to something later, the loop receives a partial closure signal. That signal reduces the ping frequency. It lowers the background noise. It frees up processing bandwidth for the task currently in front of you. This is what the neurofitness framework calls resolution anchoring. The act of providing the brain with a defined endpoint, even a temporary one, for every open loop in the system. It is not about completing everything now. It is about removing the ambiguity. Ambiguity is what keeps the loop alive. Some people find that external support for this process accelerates the pattern interruption significantly. Not motivation tools, not habit trackers. Specifically, tools that support the neural environment in which resolution becomes more accessible. Sleep quality, neural recovery, and sustained attention capacity all contribute to how efficiently the brain processes and closes open files. If you are finding that the loop persists even after deliberate interruption attempts, the link in the description references a cognitive support approach that targets this layer directly. Not as a fix, as a structural support. The distinction between fixing and supporting matters here. The loop is a pattern, not a malfunction. Supporting the conditions under which the pattern can resolve is a very different intervention than trying to override it through willpower or focus intensity. Notice that the loop tends to peak during transitions. Moving between tasks, ending a workday, preparing to sleep. These are the moments when the default mode network becomes most active. The structured task is over. The control signal relaxes. And the open files surface. That is the mental noise you feel when you try to wind down. The brain is not malfunctioning. It is processing or attempting to. The experience of a busy mind at rest is not a rest problem. It is a resolution deficit problem. The system has more open loops than it has processed closures. Over time, this creates a recognizable pattern. High cognitive output during structured activity. Significant mental noise during unstructured periods. The gap between those two states is the signature of an overloaded resolution system. The wider the gap, the more open files are running in the background. This is the break. Observe that gap without judgment. It is data. The closed signal loop is not a character flaw. It is not a personality type. It is a measurable, observable pattern in how the brain manages unresolved information under load. Recalibrating it does not require a complete behavioral overhaul. It requires precise, consistent resolution inputs applied at the right moments. The first application is the most important. At the end of any cognitive session, do not simply stop. Provide the brain with a deliberate closure statement for each major unresolved item. Not a plan, not a goal. A defined next point of contact. A time, an action, a named return. That is all the brain needs to lower the loop frequency. The second application targets the loop during active engagement. When you notice the familiar pull of unrelated thought during focused work, treat it as a signal, not an interruption. Acknowledge the open file. Assign it a return point. Record it externally if needed. Then redirect. This single act of deliberate acknowledgement is more effective than any focused technique that attempts to suppress or ignore the signal. Suppression increases loop intensity. Acknowledgement reduces it. The third application addresses the accumulation effect directly. Periodically, the system requires a full loop audit, a structured pass through all active open files. Not to resolve them all at once, but to reclassify them. Some will have resolved naturally. Some will require intentional deferral. A small number will require immediate action to close. This audit is what the neurofitness framework refers to as the cognitive ledger pass. It functions as a system reset, not emotional, not motivational, structural. It is widely observed that individuals who perform this kind of structured review report a measurable reduction in background mental noise within the same day. The loop frequency drops. The cognitive signal sharpens. Because clarity is not a state of having no open files. Clarity is a state of knowing where every open file is, and having assigned it a defined location in the system. The brain does not need an empty mind. It needs a managed one. Notice the shift in how that feels. Not lighter, not more energetic, more organized, more directional. That is the cognitive signal returning. Not because energy was added to the system, because resources were freed from the loop and returned to active processing. This is what focus actually is. Not intensity, not willpower. Available processing bandwidth directed at a single output. When the loop is running at full frequency, that bandwidth is not available. The focus is not missing. It is occupied. Recalibrate the loop. Not once. Consistently. The pattern did not form in a single session, and it will not dissolve in one either, but each deliberate resolution input reduces its frequency. Each cognitive ledger pass clears the accumulation. Each intentional deferral lowers the noise floor. The brain does not need to be forced into clarity. It needs the conditions that allow clarity to emerge from its own operating structure. That is the mechanism. That is the pattern. And now that you can see it, the loop has already begun to change. This content is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace professional, medical, or psychological advice. If you are experiencing significant cognitive difficulties or mental health concerns, consult a qualified healthcare professional.